Hello, welcome to the South Africa Brief podcast. My name is Jonathan Mokes. I'm joined by my colleagues Paul Berkowitz and Sky Swales. This podcast and local government election series is brought to you by the South Africa Brief in partnership with the Friedrich Naumann Foundation for Freedom. Paul, welcome. It's great to be here again.
It's great to be here with you.
Great. Hello, Sky.
Hi, guys. Likewise, it's good to be here.
Fantastic. So this is a first episode in a 5-part series that we will be bringing to you with the support of the Friedrich Naumann Foundation throughout July and August. We're going to be looking at the build-up to the local government elections, obviously scheduled for the 4th of November this year, 2026. We're going to start today by looking at how the general election of 2024 altered or fundamentally changed the South African political landscape. And then we're going to be moving into a detailed look at the state of the parties, the metro battlegrounds, what things look like in places like the city of Johannesburg, Tshwane, eThekwini, and then moving into the future of coalitions and also whether any of the outcomes of the local government election will have any impact on the Government of National Unity. There will be companion articles on the South Africa Brief Substack running with these podcasts that we will be putting out every week. And there already is an article on how the general election of 2024 changed South Africa's political landscape, which is available on the southafricabrief.substack.com. But I think let's dig in, Paul and Sky, and it's very, very exciting to be starting this. And I think let's start by talking about how election 2024 fundamentally changed South Africa's political landscape, because that is the departure point looking at election 2026. And just in case people have forgotten, 2024 was the moment where the ANC was brought below 50% for the first time at a national level, quite significantly to 40.2%, lost their majority in the National Assembly. The DA pretty much held firm, but they did increase slightly, got three extra seats in the National Assembly, got 21.8%. The big story, of course, was MK with 14.6%, breaking through with 58 seats. EFF also dropping a little bit marginally, but it was seismic stuff. And maybe let's just start with the ANC, because everybody's talking about the ANC's decline, but 2024 was the significant tipping point. What do you guys think caused the ANC's decline? Was it issues? Was it MK? Was it turnout issues? All of the above? Maybe Paul, kick us off with some thoughts and observations.
I think, Jonathan, the short answer is yes. It was issues and it was MK. In my mind, they are two reflections of the same phenomenon. The ANC had been dropping and has been dropping since, I think, 2011, 2014 at a national level. And I think MK in some way was a manifestation. It was a destination or a vehicle for disaffected ANC voters to say, well, I'm going to vote this party for whatever reason. They liked Jacob Zuma, they preferred the policies, it was a protest vote. So that's my short answer.
Yeah. Scott?
Well, I also think that I don't think we can discount the fact that probably there were many, many people who were traditionally ANC voters who possibly also just stayed home. So on the one hand, as Paul just said, you would have had the ones who then went, maybe through a feeling of resentment and felt disillusioned with the ANC and left for MK. But I do think that maybe there were a lot of people who just, apathy has risen and people just decide not to even come to the polls.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, turnout was the lowest it ever was in a general election. Yeah. Turnout generally for local elections and national elections has been dropping every election that we progress. We've seen turnout dropping in a number of by-elections, although there are some outliers, which we'll get into throughout this series. But maybe MK was the significant result of election 2024, and then maybe the other significant thing about 2024 was obviously the formation of the GNU, which we'll come to. But MK took a lot of people by surprise. Paul, did you see it coming?
Honestly, I didn't, Jonathan, but it didn't take everyone by surprise. We know, and hindsight is always 2020, we know that the work done by through the big poll that was done, I think, through ENCA
Yeah.
and its partners, pretty much got the numbers almost spot on to within a percentage point, both in terms of MK's national share of the vote and specifically what happened in the KwaZulu-Natal provincial vote.
Yeah.
And I think that result or that prediction, which turned out to be very accurate, seemed so strange to us that strange to me. Let me not include faceless other people in my confusion. It seemed too fantastic to be true, but it was pretty accurate.
Yeah, no, it was pretty spot on. I mean, Sky, you've got a background in KZN. How did it feel to you ahead of that election?
Well, I think I was very surprised by what happened. But I think that there's a bigger question here, is that I wonder whether they will sustain that momentum. We've seen tremendous instability. We've seen people coming and going in terms of the office bearers in the party. We've also seen people substituted like football players in terms of whoever's occupying their seats in parliament. So from a wonderful start, where they really, really came out strong, it would be very, very interesting to see how that should play out now, given that they had this opportunity as a political party, and whether they'll sustain or build on that momentum at the end of this year in the election.
Yeah, we're going to be digging into that next week with Tara Roos, who's the parliamentary correspondent of the Business Day. We're going to be asking her about the state of the main parties, how they're looking going into that, because and I think that is one of the key questions as to whether MK will sustain their momentum and also what happens in KZN. Maybe let's look at the other two, let's call them main parties. I know the other parties, other than these sort of top four, will be upset, but the main significant parties, ANC, DA, MK, EFF. Let's look at the DA. How, Paul, did you view the DA's results in 2024? Because obviously for them, the election was a success largely because of what happened after the election with the formation of the GNU and how they were able to position themselves. But in terms of their actual result and how they performed, what was your view?
If I had to give the party a score out of 10, Jonathan, I would give them a solid 5.5, 6.
Okay.
Maybe 6.5 if I was feeling generous.
Yeah.
So let's look at the different aspects. As you said, the numbers, not so great. The party rose, I think, 1 percentage point, between 1 and 2 percentage points. As you said, they added a handful of seats. Far from their best performance, which I think, you'll correct me, would have been 1 or 2 election cycles ago in 2014. Obviously, they recovered significantly from the smacking they got in 2019 by the Freedom Front Plus. And for the party, they would have said, well, we've done well, but that's off the worst performance. That's off what in economics we refer to in a boring way as the base effects.
Yeah.
So what did the DA do? Well, they recovered a lot of the votes they'd lost to the Freedom Front Plus. They didn't lose significantly during a very volatile election, but they didn't grow. As Sky said, and I think this is a point that we'll need to reference throughout the series, you've got to take into account turnout. Turnout was sharply down. The DA has traditionally been good at bringing out the vote, the differential turnout that we'll talk about. And they've done that better in local government elections than national elections. I didn't see the differential turnout in 2024. So a solid performance when the ANC and the EFF lost significant ground, the ANC in particular, but nothing that for me shot the lights out.
Yeah. I think on the DA side, so you referenced the 2014 and the 2019 elections. So I was involved in the good election 2014, where the DA got 22.2%, and then also involved in the bad election 2019, where, as you mentioned, the party lost significant support to the Freedom Front Plus, and I think the DA did do well in recovering that last year. But the turnout point that was raised, because there's been a big debate I've seen on social media constantly, that the DA actually didn't grow in 2024, because in absolute numbers, they didn't get as many votes as they did in 2024 as they did in 2019. But that's because of turnout. So I think that's probably a bit of a false narrative, because you've got to look at who turned out. And also from a seat point of view, they did increase marginally. But I think, they would have been very, very satisfied with regaining the support that they lost from the Freedom Front Plus. I think what would have frustrated them would have been being unable to sort of cut through amongst the vote from Black South Africans, probably particularly from in Gauteng, where potentially MK maybe ate their lunch a bit by being the sort of new party on the block. But Sky, how would you rate the DA's performance in 2024?
Well, I mean, like you said, I think that it's kind of serendipitous for them that the ANC did really, really badly. And I think that whatever the result was in the election, what they've done is they've capitalized after the election, and they certainly seem to have grabbed, the opportunity to be in the GNU. And that's also given them a platform, an opportunity to maybe show the voters what they would do in government. And I think that maybe if they can parlay that and build on that. So I think that it was actually kind of serendipitous for them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's actually hold that thought, because I think the DA has done well in the GNU. That's my opinion. But there's some interesting sort of points for that and against that, which we'll dig into. But I know, Sky, you've got a view on the EFF. And maybe let's just start with the EFF's performance. Now, some people have said that the EFF's marginal decline in 2024 was the start of a more broader decline. We've also seen, subsequent to election 2024, a number of people leaving the EFF. Do you think the EFF drop was a blip, also caused a little bit by the shock to the system of MK? How would you view 2024 and its immediate aftermath for them?
Well, I think that the EFF, unfortunately, is in decline. And what's very interesting is that, the EFF, I guess, in an urban centre like Joburg, they're very good at social media. They're very good at creating the hype. And when did they have their big, was it the 11th birthday party?
It was
they rented out the
10th
stadium?
one, yeah.
Or the
FNB
10th,
Stadium,
yes. So they're very good at the spectacle and creating a bit of noise. But the election performances, and even in by-elections, they don't seem to be really growing anywhere. And they could be in the decline. And I made a remark to somebody, Malema had appeared in court, I guess, waiting for the judgment about the discharge of the firearm. And what I found really interesting was that the EFF had bussed in so many supporters, and there were a lot of people who came and, who came to support and do a night vigil, right, outside the court. And what I said to somebody who is a friend of mine who's an EFF voter is that, why are they not channeling any of this energy into the fact that it actually is an election year? The fact that maybe they should be a little worried about their performance. And what's quite interesting was that even around the first voter registration weekend that we've had, I really have not seen the EFF really begin any kind of serious campaigning. So you just wonder, are they a bit distracted? Is there just a loss of direction? So I don't know, looking at that and where they seem to be right now, and I've been looking at them since the beginning of the year. And I don't know, but it could turn out very, very bad for the EFF at the end of the year.
Yeah. I mean, Paul, they were affected by MK in KZN, definitely. I mean, I think they were decimated in KwaZulu-Natal.
Yeah.
And I think that's shown in by-elections sort of subsequently. I mean, how do you think 2024 was the beginning of a slow end for the EFF, or are they going to sort of just hold, but maybe a little bit more marginalized?
I mean, when we say a slow end, that's a nice phrase, because I don't have to commit to saying when the actual end is.
Yes.
It's like Zeno's paradox. They'll keep asymptotically approaching the end, 2%, 1%, but not get there. But let's look at the numbers. Sky, Jonathan, you both mentioned them. I think KZN was before 2024. And if we look at 2019 and 2021, that was seen by the EFF as one of the areas of growth.
Yes.
And I think they were up to about 5% in 2019 in the province, the second largest pool of voters. As you said, MK smashed them. I think they're down to a couple of percent. What I have seen from one or two by-elections, which is interesting, it's not a comeback by any means, but I've seen the EFF pick off a handful of ANC wards in Limpopo, in Northwest. So maybe we have this dynamic going forward that both parties are retreating into rural enclaves. And there's one point that's a new trend. It's an anecdotal trend. It's, as we say, it's based on Uber conversations with Uber drivers and people on the street.
Your qualitative research.
Qualitative, small sample research, yes. And the plural of anecdote is not data. We love using that one. But the phenomenon of March and March, and the clear or the unspoken links between MK and March. Contrast that with Malema and the EFF's principled stance, because it's a vote loser to be against xenophobia. Xenophobia sells, not just in South Africa. We're not uniquely bad. It sold in the US for Trump. It sold in Hungary for Orban. It sells all over the world. MK are on the up and up, I think, in part because of the link with March and March. The mirror image of that is further ANC and EFF decline. And my prediction is you'll see that March and March bump coming through in Gauteng and KZN urban municipalities. That's another headwind that the EFF is going to face in this election.
Yeah, I think the immigration point is very apposite right now. As you say, I think Julius Malema has taken what I would consider to be personally a very principled position and a very electorally damaging position, but potentially.
And during our qualitative research last week, well, a certain person who gave us his vox pop, he said, if you are taking this principled stance against xenophobia, do you realize that you're making a fuss of people who cannot vote for you? And that sounds very crude, but one cannot deny the veracity or the relevance of that.
And Paul, just also to on your point about the rural enclave. So at the time that we are recording this, the EFF's launching its local government election campaign, and the place it has chosen to launch is Thoyanda. In rural Limpopo, vendor-speaking region, completely bears out what you're saying, and very unusual for them, because I think traditionally they've gone for more urban, metro, sort of Johannesburg, bigger stadiums. So quite interesting that they've chosen that.
Yes, and I think that the EFF may have peaked in Gauteng. If I'm not mistaken, the party share of the vote in Joburg, Tshwane, Ekurhuleni in 2019 was less than in 2014. And in 2021, a little bit less than in 2016 at the local level. Now, we know that the EFF is part of these incumbent coalitions in Joburg, Tshwane, and Ekurhuleni, also Mogale City, Mfuleni, with the ANC leading. So, I mean, as Joburgers, we know that this is a pretty poor administration. If the ANC is going to suffer because they are the incumbent coalition leaders, you'd expect the EFF to suffer some splash damage as well. And what we might end up with, not that will make any ANC or EFF voters happy, is now a bun fight in Limpopo to try and shore up what's left there.
So let's come back to a point, Sky, you raised about the Government of National Unity, and that was obviously, together with MK, the big story of 2024 was the fact that for the first time since the Mandela GNU collapsed, 96, 97, this was the first time a Government of National Unity and national coalition came back to South African politics. It was formed initially out of an agreement with the ANC and DA. Often I call it more of a grand coalition with some of the other parties formed in, but I'm sure parties like the IFP will say, no, we were very instrumental in putting that together. Do we think the GNU been a good thing, bad thing? How would you assess how it's going? I know that is a very broad question to kick off with, but let's dig into it a little bit and set some trailers for future conversations we'll have with guests over the next couple of weeks.
So it's really interesting because I think Paul and I and others, we've been having this conversation about the future of South African democracy is its coalition politics. What I find quite interesting is that it actually seems to have held together. I mean, we're in 2026 now. I'm sure that there are detractors, like within the DA, within the ANC.
Definitely.
There are detractors on in all the parties who maybe are not as enthusiastic about it. But what's interesting is that it has held together. What I'm very intrigued with, because we're now looking at a local government election this year, is whether that would parlay into, like I was wondering, is there a chance perhaps that the DA and the ANC could say, well, we could govern together in certain municipalities or metros? So it'd be very, very interesting to see what the effect of the LG is on those relationships within the GNU.
Yeah.
People will also have to start distinguishing themselves as political parties, because you've been part of the GNU now, but now you also need to see how you can use that to market yourself or to distinguish yourself from any perceived failures of the GNU, and how you're going to actually use that to your advantage. Trying to sell your party and your policies in the local government election.
Yeah. We're definitely going to be digging into that a lot over the coming weeks, and specifically what are the scenarios after the election results on the 4th of November and what that means for the GNU. But just maybe going back into the past 2 years, I mean, it feels like a decade in South African politics. It feels so long ago, election 2024, but it wasn't that long ago. It's just over 2 years. There were a lot of early flashpoints, Paul, in the government of national unity. And I say early, sort of, I'm thinking kind of circa 2025. Obviously, there were policy disagreements. There was the Bella Bill. There's still the ongoing NHI issue. The big thing was, of course, the budget.
1.0, 2.0, and finally 3.0.
Yes,
Yeah.
and I think it was, many people saw that as a strong lesson for the ANC in coalition politics and how it works. Do you think the GNU was ever at threat of actually collapsing, or do you think it was just sort of theatrics and politics that people were playing at the time, particularly from the DA side, to sort of drive? Because one of the things I'd like to dig in a little bit after you've answered this point is how the DA have actually, I think, successfully positioned themselves as an opposition party, but still in government. But do you think the GNU was ever at risk of collapsing?
I do.
Okay.
I don't know how we can objectively quantify that risk, or when it was high or not. We don't have a DEFCON or a doomsday clock on this coalition. Might be a nice feature to put on the Substack. I think the pressure was more from within the ANC camp, Jonathan. We'll talk about how the DA may have threaded the needle, and one thing to point out, we'll come back to, the DA wasn't alone.
Of course.
In opposing the budget. They had very strong support outside the GNU from the EFF and MK. So I think the ANC at the time, with the budget last year, was isolated. There was strong factionalism from within the party. Remember that when the GNU was formed, at the time there was about an equally sized faction within the ANC that wanted the EFF as a national coalition partner and not the DA. At the time that the problems with budget 25-26 were playing out in the media, we knew that the howls from within the ANC caucus, the actual ANC members of parliament, were quite clear. They might still not like the DA counterparts and peers on the benches. They wanted to exit. It was really, I think at the time, it was the powers within the ANC. It was Ramaphosa and his faction and his inner cabal that were keeping things together. And I think that still have the balance of power. Within the DA, as you've said, there is a faction that doesn't want to be in bed with the ANC, but it's much smaller and weaker. And I think the dominant ANC faction, and there's a through line, whether it's Steenhuisen or Hill Lewis now, plus Zille, the voices with power in the party are in favor of being in the GNU. They like the positions, they like, as Sky said, having the opportunity to showcase what their party can do with ministers and deputy ministers at the national level. I think there was a real risk. I do feel that after this coming election, where I expect the ANC to do badly, there will be a flare-up again of factionalism within the ANC, and there will be louder voices possibly calling for a change again in the GNU. We'll see. It depends on the numbers. But, I mean, the party's so weak, and I think this is a discussion we'll probably have in the weeks to come, or maybe outside of this podcast series. When a party becomes too small and too weak, like the EFF or the ANC, when the SACP is already peeling off before the election and COSATU are meeting with EFF and MK to talk about a coalition of the left, you know, there's not that much to break away from. When you're already that small, you're not really forming a breakaway party. It's more like whoever is left of the smaller faction is going into another room and folding their arms kind of thing.
Yeah, there are lots of scenarios, obviously, to come because there's the local government election results. There's the fact that there's an ANC conference next year, 2027, for the successor to Cyril Ramaphosa.
Yes.
We've seen the trend of presidents being recalled before their time. What would a Paul Mashatile, Fikile Mbalula, or even a Patrice Motsepe think and be thinking about the GNU, and obviously heading into 2029, which probably is an even bigger risk to the ANC than 2026. But let's not get sort of beyond ourselves. Just circling back, I think, to the DA point about threading the needle. I mean, the GNU has stabilized. There's no doubt about it. 2026 has been a significantly more stable year. The DA, going back to my point, I think, and Sky, I think you were referencing this, the DA has been relatively successful in still being able to be probably still the most prominent opposition to the ANC from within the GNU, but at the same time still demonstrating what it can achieve in government. Obviously, it had a big problem with the foot and mouth crisis, which affected John Steenhuisen and probably led to his removal from post. But I think the DA's pretty much actually handled it well, which is unusual in global politics because junior coalition partners often suffer. The DA, and on the basis of some of the public polling that's been released, seems to be consolidating and growing, and as we'll dig into in future episodes, in a relatively strong position going into the local government election.
Do you think that maybe everybody within the GNU, even in particular people within the ANC, are just being extremely pragmatic and realizing we're in this situation, we have to make it work because they didn't have the numbers to govern by themselves? I always wonder, to what extent can you attribute the stability or the success, like, to pragmatism?
Well, I think the GNU is pragmatism,
that's
but it was an opportunity from a DA point of view, and maybe I'm talking a little bit with my old career history in the back of my mind. I think the DA would have seen it as a big opportunity, and they made 2024 a success and a momentum builder on the basis of that. Paul, ANC pragmatic, but I mean, because they also, I mean, pragmatism, I suppose, would have also stretched to making a deal with the EFF and MK. It's difficult to tell.
Let me take an opposing view.
Good.
Just for fun and to maintain the dramatic tension here. I believe, and I think Sky is much more well-read than I am, so please correct me if I misquote. I believe it was Winston Churchill who said something along the lines, and this was in the context of the Second World War, about the Americans. He said, you can always count on the Americans to do the right thing once they've exhausted every other opportunity. right? And I'd apply that to the ANC. I don't think it's pragmatism. I think it's the factions having exhausted each other. I think it's the reality dawning. And what we didn't talk about is maybe this imposed pragmatism. Because you'll remember February, March last year, budget 1.0. There was this, there was the ANC of old, the finance minister Enoch Godongwana, just announcing by fiat, oh, we're going to raise VAT. We're not going to have to consult. We don't have to talk to our coalition partners. The pushback was strong. By the time Budget 3.0 came along, and then even after that last year when we looked at the medium-term budget policy statement, if we looked at the language that Godongwana used in his speeches, if we looked at the language of the speeches, which obviously drafted by committee, you can see the DNA of the DA and other coalition partners in how economic policy, there's clearly a compromise. The budget this year wasn't just unilaterally pushed by the ANC. So I don't think the realization happened when the ANC had 40% and they had to form a coalition that things had shifted. I think when the budget almost fell apart was the realization that this is the stress test, that things have shifted. And, you know, pragmatism as a last resort maybe, but you can see an echo in the GNU how it was constructed. Because we've talked about this before. The ANC and the DA have the raw numbers between them. They've got over 60% of the vote between them. They don't need 8 other parties. But the ANC needs that as padding and insurance and buffers and to satisfy this faction that, you know, we have compromises and we have opportunities and we're going to share the ministerial and deputy ministerial seats and blunt some of the DA's power. And it's all about satisfying different interests, no clear narrative. The DA's got factions, but no one's pretending that the anti-GNU faction is equal or that they have the same weight. We talked about this in Ekurhuleni. The ANC and the EFF they've got a clear, strong majority in that metro. They didn't need an AIC figurehead mayor or a PA MMC this or a deputy president that, but they can't trust each other, and there's factions and there's fig leaves and there's layers of buffers and nonsense and obfuscation. And that's my take.
Yeah. I love the phrase imposed pragmatism. I think there's another substack in that TM to Paul. So let's maybe shift to, not maybe, Jonathan, but let's definitely move from the national to the province. And we've also got this phenomenon called GPUs in addition to a GNU. So
we've also got GLUs.
We've got GLUs, and that's going to be an interesting point of topic on the 5th, 6th, 7th of November and beyond. So 3 provinces where the ANC went below 50% in addition to obviously the Western Cape. So 4 provinces where the ANC didn't get a majority. Western Cape, outright majority for the DA. Northern Cape, they dropped slightly below 50%. They've got a confidence and supply arrangement with the Freedom Front Plus, and things at the time of recording seem pretty stable in the Northern Cape. Let's focus on Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal, where the ANC again has had to form governments of provincial unity. And let's kick off with Gauteng. Initially, I think it was the DA that nominated Panyaza Lesufi to be elected as premier in the Gauteng legislature, and it looked odds on that in Gauteng, the government of provincial unity was going to sort of follow the lead of the government of national unity. But then it all fell apart, and until recently, when the EFF was brought in, the ANC has been effectively running a minority government. Why no DA in the Gauteng GPU?
The way you're both looking at me. Would you like to?
I haven't been keeping up with that development.
All right, hospital pass.
Yes.
As I recall, and please, either or both of you jump in if I get the story wrong, the negotiations were proceeding. The ANC and the DA were at the stage where they were divvying up who's getting this MEC position and that one. And if I'm not mistaken, there's about 10 or 11 positions on offer, including Premier and then the various positions. The ANC didn't like the DA split. I think the DA were looking for at least 4 or 5 positions in the provincial cabinet, and Panyaza as well. And I'm going to fill in some blanks, hopefully filling them in correctly. We know about Panyaza, we know about his modus operandi within the ANC, fighting factionalism. We keep coming back to factionalism within the province to get the position. He had his people, possibly his slate that he needed to bring along with him, give positions to. I don't think he personally likes the DA and probably didn't trust such a powerful coalition partner, and would rather have taken the 2-seat and the 1-seat parties, because who do we have at the moment? We've got the IFP, we've got the Patriotic Alliance, we've got Rise and Mzansi.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. For whatever reason, I think Panyaza would have preferred to be, I mean, the reasons I've outlined, they're not my reasons, but he would have preferred to have a more shaky minority government than hand over power at the beginning. I think Panyaza makes some of the things up as he goes along, and probably feels that he can finesse and, ad hoc, think on his feet in any situation.
And then probably had your imposed pragmatism, TM, put on him with this year when he had to pass a budget and then had to bring in the EFF, who got the finance MEC slot.
Yeah, I mean, luckily for him last year, because of the timing, they would have probably passed the provincial budget in 24, they would have passed the provincial budget before the election. I think last year the EFF and MK assisted the ANC in passing last year's budget, but got harder this year.
But then I think it was the Ekurhuleni dynamics that then said to the EFF, we're not necessarily going to support you as we have been doing. They've got some bargaining chips, and then Panyaza had to negotiate.
And that's our first nod, hat tip towards this trend that whatever happens in one sphere of government can spill over into another.
Absolutely. To be continued there.
To be continued.
KwaZulu-Natal.
Talk to the woman
from KwaZulu-Natal. So again, just a bit of context setting. So MK carves up in KwaZulu-Natal, doesn't quite get a outright majority, so ends up on 46%. The IFP, the ANC, the DA managed to put together a GPU critically involving the National Freedom Party, who has 1 seat, which I think gives them 41 seats on the government side to 39, where you've got basically MK and a few EFF people. And that has stayed relatively set up until a particular point last year, where the NFP leadership, and now that leadership I put in inverted commas because I remain confused about internal politics in the NFP, which we'll come to, suddenly decide, well, we are going to entertain supporting MK on a motion of no confidence, and we're going to instruct our MEC, who's the MEC for Social Development, Mbali Shinga, to vote with MKFF. She defies them. There's a whole suspension process. It's going on in court at the moment.
She litigated, and I think the court found in her favour. And it seems to me, if I remember correctly, that about 2 weeks ago, they just went ahead and they suspended her again. And apparently she's been very defiant. And I seem to think the last I heard of that, which could have been last week or the week before, that as far as she's concerned, the court has reinstated her. I think that whole thing is a little bit too... Things are still uncertain, and we'll see what's going to happen there, because
so I think
she seems determined to stay.
She seems very determined to stay and to hold the original position of being with the current GPU. So I think what happened is she was removed as a MPL, which immediately invalidated her social development, because the NFP sort of gave that instruction to the speaker.
Yes.
She then, I think, has been reinstated on the basis of an interdict, but she's still reviewing her expulsion and disciplinary procedures from the NFP. Yes. But the NFP is a mess, because you also had a Secretary General emerging, who Ivan Barnes says is not the Secretary General. The SG tried to suspend Ivan Barnes. It's just a complete mess. But I think, so that's going to be very fragile as the court proceedings progress. And MK is very, very frustrated because it's the biggest party in KwaZulu-Natal. It's not able to get into government, and it needs this NFP seat. But I thought what was very interesting, what's come out in the past month, and again, it's the EFF involvement. The IFP, in an attempt to try and shore up the GPU, apparently made some overtures to the EFF, which the DA in KwaZulu-Natal said, absolutely not, that's a red line for us. If the EFF are brought in by the IFP, we're out of the GPU. So again, that shows implications of what could happen nationally.
Yeah. The DA's red line, we know all about it. It's the red line that's collapsed their dominant coalition in Joburg, in Tshwane, in Ekurhuleni, in Nelson Mandela Bay, possibly in Kwadukuza, where they could have cobbled something together with the EFF. There's a longer list, but we're working down it. The other wrinkle I can think of is that there was talk of the of MK making overtures to ANC MPLs sometime last year, which caused friction within the MK party. I'm assuming that Zuma and MK leaders don't want to openly bicker with the ANC and get involved in factionalism, because there's still some weird relationship or some weird resolution that MK and Zuma expect with the ANC. I don't know.
Yeah.
Short answer, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, it's as you were saying about the Gauteng Premier, a lot of people are sort of making it up as they go forward and having to react to sort of daily situations and things as they progress.
Also, just one very interesting development last week in eThekwini was that the former mayor has left the ANC.
Sandile Gumede.
Yes, at Gumede. So she has gone to the MK.
Yeah.
So we'll see. I guess it's very difficult because what Paul discussed just the point you just made about the MK or the ANC trying to work together. I think that you're going to have definitely factions within the ANC in KZN who are going to feel extremely resentful and betrayed by the people who dumped the ANC and then went off to work on Zuma's election campaign.
Yeah.
So,
but I think as we've written about and discussed, I mean, what's always important to remember about MK is they do see themselves as an external faction of the ANC, and their opposition to the ANC in 2024, they'd often speak about the ANC, Ramaphosa's ANC.
Yes.
And MK, to an extent, could be seen as Zuma's ANC. So that's always very important to understand, particularly when we look at the trajectory of things moving forward beyond 2026 and 2027. I think as we wrap up now, because I think it's been very, very helpful to sort of set the scene for the next conversations that we've got going on. What are your immediate thoughts right now, both of you, on what the local government election will do to the Government of National Unity? We're going to have a specific podcast discussion, but it would be good to just get your views. I mean, how do you see things unfolding nationally as a result of what happens on the 4th of November?
Well, I mean, I have a strong suspicion. I don't know what it's grounded in. But I do think that whatever, like Paul says, the forced pragmatism, right, that's happened in the GNU, it's fine. It seems to be, plugging on along and doing okay. For anyone who is within the GNU, they need to distinguish themselves in the eyes of the voter from any failures or perceived failures, right, of the GNU, because you want to distinguish your offering in the marketplace. So I think, and I don't really know what we will see, but we definitely might see that as the different parties start to compete and to really, really start campaigning and intensively towards the local government election, it could, expose some fault lines. It could lead to some sort of, bigger arguments, between the parties as they work together in the GNU. What do you think, Paul?
There's definitely some scenarios, Sky, Jonathan, and we'll discuss them in the upcoming weeks, where the tensions grow too big between the ANC and the DA. There's some specific scenarios where those tensions are inflamed. But I keep coming back to the numbers. If you remove the DA from this 10-party GNU, you're left with barely a majority. And we had this discussion, and we've written about it and looked at different scenarios way back last year when budget 1.0 through 3.0 was happening, and we had to consider what was happening because ANC factions were saying, let's substitute out the DA. But the numbers make it difficult. The obvious choice is to bring in the EFF. That was the obvious choice at the time. That would give the coalition sufficient numbers. The EFF reduced circumstances, but still with about 35, 37 seats. I forget the exact number. That's good enough. I think if I look at all the possible scenarios, and maybe I'm limited by my imagination at this point, on a balance of probabilities, I see the GNU surviving, more or less in its current form. But we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. As the classic saying goes, a week is a long time in politics, and 3 months is an eternity. So there's a lot to happen until then. Well, Paul and Sky, thank you very, very much. I think it's been wonderful to set the scene by looking back at 2024 and some of the implications.
Yeah.
I think South African politics is definitely a completely changed environment, changed landscape since before 2024, and this local government election of the 4th of November is going to be, I think, defining in terms of the era we now find ourselves in. So thank you very, very much, both of you, again.
And also just what's so interesting when we speak about the various budget debacles and all of that, it seems like an extremely long time ago because there's always so much happening.
Yeah, it does. There's always so much happening. So thank you very much again. To our loyal listeners, thank you for tuning in and for downloading this. As mentioned at the top, this is the first of 5 podcasts that we will be doing over the next couple of weeks. The accompanying article on how election 2024 changed the South African political landscape is available on the South Africa Brief Substack. So that's the southafricabrief.substack.com. And thank you again, as ever, to our partners, the Friedrich Naumann Foundation, for supporting us in putting these podcasts together. And we look forward to seeing you again next week when we will be speaking with the Business Day parliamentary correspondent Tara Roos on the state of the main parties and the political landscape heading in to the 4th of November on 2026. Until next time, see you soon.